Welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin, and I'm joined by my dear friend and co-host, Dr. Sylvia Bank. Between our two households, we're navigating life with 10 children, so we know how chaotic parenting can be. As Johns Hopkins trained pediatricians, we also know the science. Our goal is to bring you the best of both worlds, medically sound, trustworthy advice, and practical, real-world insights as we dive into the trials and triumphs of parenting. Please note this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor. Today, we are focusing on transitioning out of the crib and to the toddler bed. When to do that, how to do it. So that toddler bed transition.
Right. It can be a very easy time or it can be a very difficult time. So I'm excited to talk about that today.
So I think where we should start is let's just talk about some general principles for when you should consider transitioning out of the crib and to the toddler bed. Do you have any overall thoughts or guidance on that?
The rule of thumb for me is keep them in the crib as long as you can if they're safe, right? There is no need to rush to the toddler bed any earlier. If they're happy in their crib and they're safe in their crib, I don't see any need to push the toddler bed any earlier, right?
Okay, yeah, I generally agree with that. I will say that in part of my decision making, so, some of my kids are like 18 to 20 months apart. And there was, with the certain child that I thought was going to transition well, this thought in my mindset of we need to check this off the list before the new baby comes, right?
Yeah. And for me, I think I was more on the camp of, I don't want to rock the boat. Everyone's sleeping really well now. And I even resorted to buying a second crib. When a lot of people have a baby on the way and they feel that pressure to get the first baby out of the crib because the new baby is coming, I removed that entire pressure altogether. And I wound up having 2 sets of cribs just to avoid that early toddler transition. And I know that's not everybody's option, but that's what we opted to.
That's fascinating. I vaguely remember this about you, but I had forgotten. No, we never had 2 cribs. I always had a baby going into a pack and play, even when I still had one in a crib. But I actually got to the point, by my 6th where I was like, why even have a crib? I mean, the pack and play is so much easier. And then once they climb out, it's safer. So that one didn't even ever transition to a crib from the pack and play, I'll have to admit. So at any rate, that's the large family dynamics is another topic for another time, but that is really funny. To your point of there are times where you just keep them in the crib as long as they can, as long as they're safe.
Right.
So then let's talk about when you have to transition, the other pressing factor of when it's no longer safe for them to stay in the crib.
Yeah.
Some of the guidelines I hear are certainly a lot of babies they'll start pulling up to stand. And there might be like a couple months in there where they're safe doing that and they're not having that agility or height to start actually trying to climb out of the crib yet. Once they're pulling up to stand and you're at like mid-chest or nipple height, then they're getting close to being able to do that. Or certainly for that child that's super agile who starts to try to climb out, then it's time. We need to get out because the crib can be just too high.
So my oldest child was very advanced with his gross motor skills. Even at a very early age, he was beginning to climb out of the crib. My son would get on the corner. I don't know what he would do, and kind of shimmy his way with his arms up the side like he was Jackie Chan, then get on the corner up high with his arms and be able to swing his leg over and get out. And that was obviously an indicator. He would get out of the crib and we'd get him from nap or in the morning and he would be out of the crib. How did you get out of the crib? So that was obviously an indicator that, look, if he can climb his way out of this thing, we need to transition him to the toddler bed, right?
Yeah, totally. I only had one that happened with. So my first was very tall. So she transitioned before I had my second because she was meeting that height.
Right.
15 months or 18 months, certainly. She was meeting that height and she has continued to remain very tall before she was trying to climb out. So I switched her. But I had one, this is one of my children who's very petite. And my goal with her, like you said previously, was she was going to stay in the crib as long as possible. It was kind of a big transition time for our family with foster to adopt. She was going to stay in that crib as long as I could keep her in there. And I had one nap time where I could just hear her just like crying in almost like a screaming kind of way that seemed so different. And I didn't have a video monitor at the time. I only had audio. So I went to go check on her, and she was perched on the corner of the crib with her two legs at like a 90-degree angle on either side. And she was scared. Like she had gotten up there and she didn't know what to do. And that was a situation I really didn't want to be in, because I vowed like, okay, you're not going into the crib again, which then forced it to be this like first order issue of now I have to transition you today. Like I wasn't going to do that, but now I have to transition you today, because she was obviously scared. She knew how to do it. She could do it again. So that's my funny story with the child climbing out of the crib. I think your child was so agile that he could like climb over and get down, and he wasn't afraid at all.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid at all. He was very crafty, and it forced us to do the toddler bed early, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about there's a couple of guiding principles when you're ready, when you're thinking it's time to transition out of the crib into the toddler bed. I mean, first of all, figure out when works for you. Like know your schedule, know your family schedule, know your child, right? So it could be that you have a child that you think can stay in that crib as long as they can until they're tall enough and be fine. Or you could already see, I have a child who's a climber. I need to figure out how to get them out sooner, right? So I feel like some of that forward thinking makes this a little bit less stressful. Like let's figure out what works best for our family to do this transition and figure out the right time. So when I would transition my children from the crib to their toddler bed, I would plan ahead for when I was going to do it so that it was a time that was a little bit lower stress. It might be like a long weekend, like a 3-day weekend or a holiday time where there was more time. And I would plan that when I transitioned them on those first couple of nights, for my first few kids, what I did was that somebody would be sleeping on the floor outside of the room on a mattress or an air mattress, so that as they got out of bed, which we knew that they were going to do, and opened the door, you were right there to remind them, hey, no, you need to go get back into your bed to go to sleep. And I would also use nap time as a training time. So if it was a weekend and I was there and we were all home, we could use nap time to be training that transition as well. Those were like really good practice times, and also time to just build a lot of hype around this. Like, hey, you are now a big girl or a big boy. You get to go to this nice bed that looks so beautiful with the blankets and the stuffed animal or whatever that we picked out. And there was this excitement around this transition of you're not a baby anymore. You get to go to a big girl or big boy bed, just like your older siblings if it was one of the younger kids. And then I also generally always put a baby gate across the door. So I would start with nap time. So that was the training ground. Like they could get out of bed. They would come to the gate, which would stop them. I would hear them. And then I could remind them, hey, you need to go get back in your bed. And then that would be there at night too, as like they might be able to climb over the gate, but it was like a stop measure for me to hear them and to remind them, go get back into your bed. And I would say that for my first few children, this worked beautifully. And they transitioned very easily, just with a little bit of consistency, a little bit of reminder, a little bit of incentive and hype around it, and a little bit of pre-planning.
And I feel like your storytelling is a good way of just setting yourself up for success, right? Anticipating that they may come out already there to redirect, establishing the habit that no, you stay in your own room and we're right here. Then they get used to the routine of, yes, of course, I sleep in my toddler bed all night long. That was the way of establishing that routine right off the bat.
You know, that makes me think of, I mentioned having the special blanket and the special stuffed animal in the bed, and often a transition object helps with this transition as well. And, you know, across my children, you know, one had a stuffed animal dolphin, one had a stuffed animal bear, a couple had a special blanket that was given to them by grandma. Like they all had some special thing that they went to bed with. Did your kids have any transition objects like that?
So my older daughter had this soothing nighttime stuffed animal. When you pressed the stomach, it would gently glow and it would play this lullaby.
Yes, baby seahorse.
Yes, it was baby seahorse. We originally had a blue one, and then they came out with a pink one. So we had both baby seahorses, and this was her most prized object. My last child, actually, her transition object was not your standard stuffed animal. Somehow she got attached to like a washcloth, you know, those little small soft washcloths that you use to bathe your baby.
Yeah.
She would take a washcloth and it would be slightly damp, and she would use this washcloth as her transition object. And we actually had a name for it. We called it Wet Towelly, and she loved her Wet Towelly. And the beauty of Wet Towelly was that we had a plethora of different washcloths. Wet towel wasn't the same gross object that never got cleaned. Like you couldn't put baby seahorse in the washing machine, right? This had mechanical parts to it. But, you had a new fresh wet towel clean every day. Also, if we ever traveled and we were in a hotel, they had wet towels there too. Like it was something that was so easy to replace, and it could be basically anything.
It's brilliant. Yes.
So one reason why my husband liked my kids to be attached to a transition object is that he had a particular technique to get them to stay in bed. There's really no motivation for a toddler to stay in their bed. I don't know if I would recommend this for every child's psyche, but for my children, this technique worked really well, where they would be coming out of their room or crying in their bed, and we wanted them to go to sleep, right? So he would go up there and threaten to take away the transition object.
Oh my goodness.
If you don't stay in this bed, then I'm taking baby seahorse away. And it became this negative reinforcement to say like, no, don't take baby seahorse. I will go to sleep. So that was something that as they start getting kind of silly about not sleeping and goofy about it, it's like, no, we're serious here. Like, we'll take away baby seahorse if you don't go to sleep right now. So that was a technique that worked well for our kids that were attached to an object.
So we've talked about our styles, like how we planned for the transition, when we did it, what measures we put in place to make it as easy as possible, what things we did. Let's talk about those times when it does not go as planned, when it's not as easy as it is with some kids, because kids are different and some kids transition smoothly and some don't. So let's talk about tips and tricks in that scenario. This is what it makes me think of. On the AAP guidance, on the healthychildren.org guidance, it says, luckily, most kids are happy to graduate and stay in their beds more willingly than they did in their cribs. However, for a few, the transition has to be managed closely. Mm-hmm. And, one of my mantras in parenting, people may have heard me say this before, is that if all of your children were very, very easy and all of these things, you probably just didn't have enough children.
Yeah.
And as I described, my first was exceptionally easy. In fact, I will say that my first three were all fairly easily transitioning to the toddler bed. So I thought I knew what I was doing. I had the hang of it. I can, teach classes on this. Look at how wonderfully and beautifully they've transitioned. I did have one that was tough, and that was my fifth. Thankfully, I was a little further down the line, lest I be deterred from continuing to have more children. But she was my one who I kept her. I knew she was going to be tough. And like you had said, I wanted to keep her in the crib as long as possible. She was the one I found perched on the edge of the crib, like terrified, and decided I had to transition her right then. And she was absolutely in that category of needing to be managed more closely because she was so active and she was not a great sleeper at night. And she was actually my child who pushed me to get a video monitor for a room because I needed to know what was going on. She also, she was my fifth, but I knew when I transitioned her, she had to be in her own room or she was going to wake up everybody else in the room. So, at that time there's this shuffling and I've got like multiple children like sharing rooms. And here is this tiny little 2.5-year-old who has her own bedroom. But that was what was needed for this particular child. And it was sort of this evolution of realizing where the problems were and fixing them. So I started off just like my others with the, simple twin bed, the, toys, stuffed animals, all of that still in the room, put her in, reminded her, have the gate on the door. And interestingly, she didn't come out, but what she would do is she would take all of the stuffed animals, she would pile them up so that she could reach the light switch and she would turn on the light and then she would sit there and play in the middle of the night for like a couple hours. And then I would find her asleep on the floor, right? This is like a process of me realizing like, you're not sleeping, you're like staying up, you're cranky the next morning. I'm switching to the video camera. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what you're doing. So then what happened was all of the toys went out of the room, right? Like this evolution where the room is becoming your effective crib or playpen. And so, just your special one that you can sleep with that isn't big enough for you to climb up and get to the light switch. So then the light was staying off. And then I would discover she would find anything in the room that she could to fidget with, including the closet, and just like take things apart, just like whatever it was. So then the next evolution in the problem solving was, okay, I can't give up that closet space because I'm already shoehorning in the 8 people in this house and their things. Let's make that long-term storage, like Christmas decorations. So took out all the clothes, everything else out of the closet, loaded it with things that I didn't need very often, and then the bed got pushed against the closet. So she can no longer open the closet door. She now only has access to like 1 or 2 stuffed animals, and then it's just the bed. And then the evolution got, because she was, 2.5 at the point that I transitioned her, she started getting tall enough to reach the light switch. So then the light bulbs came out of the overhead light, right? So you can't turn on the light because we know, you turn on the light, that stimulates your brain. Even for us as adults, it makes it harder to go back to sleep. She was so active, she often fell asleep on the floor. So in addition to her bed, where we always put her to sleep, there was also a pallet on the floor to encourage her to just go sleep on that when she was active and didn't want to go back into the bed. So it was a process. So that statement of the transition has to be managed more closely was absolutely true for her. And it took a while. I will say now, she, a decade later, she's a fabulous sleeper. So all of my projection I did as a young mom of this toddler that she would be a teenager who was like opening our windows and climbing out to escape the house at night because she was so active and want to do things at night, have been completely unfounded. She sleeps great. She wakes up on time great. And she's that typical teenager who can also sleep all day and lay in bed and read all day if given the opportunity. So none of that happened, but it was a challenge. I'll say that.
Sometimes the challenge isn't with the initial transition, but the routine has been established and then something messes it up. And now the child is continually getting out of bed.
Sometimes in the office, what I see is they have those routines and then their child is sick and for a period of time is sleeping with the parents. They go on vacation where they're in a hotel and sleeping with the parents. And then they get back home and then it becomes a new problem. What do I do now? How do I reestablish my routines? And that's some of the advice that I give in the office. And I think this actually happens because when your baby is in a crib and you put them down in the crib, they can't get out of the crib, open the door, and come into your room. They can cry and you can see them on the monitor, but it's when they start transitioning to that toddler bed where they now have the freedom to open the door, roam around, and come and get you. So that's when this starts happening. There's often a worry at that point for parents because there can be like a anxiety or a fear that children feel surrounding sleep at that time, that fear of being alone, whether or not they had a nightmare that they're afraid of. Then the parents will start worrying, is my child going to have anxiety? I don't want to force them into anything because I don't want to make their fears worse. I'm going to be as understanding and supportive because they seem anxious about this. So just to set the stage of what that may look like in a toddler and the parent who's seeing these newfound sleep problems. And I've had a patient that has come in with this problem, a very well-educated patient that started seeking online resources and went down this rabbit hole, as they shared with me, about therapy and psychology and how you get your 3-year-old in some sort of psychotherapy to talk about sleep and to ease their anxiety and their fear surrounding sleep. And it surprised me these resources were out there for parents because it's very different than the first tier advice that I give them. And I give this with firsthand practice. This is what we did with our children. So around that time, I think children often at the late 2, early 3, when they're out of their crib, they're exercising their independence and their will, right? This is a stage, the terrible twos. A child wants stuff and they are asserting themselves onto their parents. And during this phase, I feel like children will start trying to control their sleep. They just refuse to go to sleep in their own room. I want to sleep with you. I want you to be in my room. I want you in here while I'm falling asleep. There starts to be demands. Children can vocalize their wants and needs now instead of just crying like babies. And some very well-meaning parents are like, okay, psychologically you may need this. Let me just stay in your room until you fall asleep and then I'll leave. They start down these new habits that aren't very healthy as a part of proper sleep hygiene. So usually what I recommend is turning the tables. We talked about this a little bit in the thumb sucking episode, where instead of being adversarial about, I want you to stop sucking your thumb, you still want to do it, you try to create a situation where you're both working for the same thing. So like in the thumb sucking episode, when they're ready, you put some large reward in place where they want the reward and they're asking you to help them to stop sucking their thumbs so they can achieve the reward. This is very similar as what I outline that parents do. Stop focusing around all the details of the anxiety of the bedtime or who is outsmarting who in the bedtime routine, and just refocus the energy in a collaborative effort to get your child to sleep in their bed at night. And this is what we did as parents. So some sort of reward. Take your child to Target and have them pick something out from the dollar table in the beginning. Something small, a small reward. And this is where children at this age, when they're able to assert their own thoughts and opinions, hopefully at that same developmental stage, they're able to achieve delayed gratification. So we talked about this in other episodes where they know that there's a reward ahead and they work towards that reward. They're not just wanting it right here, now and then. They understand that I can get this later if I do this. So this is what we capitalize on in that, I think 3-year-old age is usually when I start suggesting that this may be done. So you get them some sort of reward. They pick it out. You don't pick it out, let them pick it out. And then you tell them, if you stay in your bed all night long, then you'll get this in the morning. Some people have used Matchbox cars because they're $1 or $1.25 each, something not too expensive, and set it up as a reward. Suddenly your child is incentivized to stay in their bed because otherwise they have no reason or no incentive to do that. And then you can start rewarding them. And if they couldn't that night or they had a rough time, it's okay, we're going to try again the next day. You can even break it down even further. Like if you fall asleep in your bed, you get the reward. And then later we work on staying in your bed for a reward. Dial it down to as much as your child can handle initially, and then give them the reward as soon as they achieve it. And then continue this reward-like pattern where we're both working towards some sort of reward, and then we're both helping each other achieve that. I'm not telling you you need to stay in your bed. You're not telling me that you don't want to. We're both saying, let's earn this reward, and we both want you to do that. So that is how I suggest to parents to change the narrative and to reward your child for sleeping through the night or sleeping in their bed. And eventually it can be like a sticker chart where 5 nights in a row, and then you get a larger prize. You can be creative about how you reward your child with that.
Yeah, one of the practical ways I see this played out is with the bedtime pass. So, at the beginning of the night or the beginning of the week, the child gets a certain number of bedtime passes, and they're told, you can use this if you need to get a drink of water. You can use this if you need another hug goodnight. You can use this if you need to go to the bathroom. But you have this many passes for the night, and any passes that you don't use, you can redeem for some kind of prize. Or, as time goes on, any passes that you don't use for the week, you can redeem for some kind of prize. So again, it's this idea of, instead of wrestling with your child, we're trying to get on the same team with the same incentive, with the same motivation, so that we are choosing this together. And that very independent seeking 2-year-old or 3-year-old feels like, okay, I'm the one choosing to do this. I'm the one who's in power. I am getting what I want because I want that reward from the bedtime pass. We always refer you to the healthychildren.org site powered by the AAP.
They have a little info sheet about big kid beds, when to switch from a crib. First of all, they recommend to keep the same bedtime routine. You don't want to make any changes to anything. They're already used to their routine. And then keep that routine consistent. If they get out of bed, the site says, calmly and quietly lead them back and tell them they must stay in bed. When they get back into bed, reward them by briefly telling them what a good sleeper they are, and then leave the room. Tell them that you will come back and check on them throughout the night. For some children, that provides reassurance. The AAP's website does caution parents to prepare themselves for a potential bedtime struggle. So their recommendation is, if this is a repetitive problem where their child is continuing to come out of bed, to be prepared to repeat those steps over and over again, as many times as you need to, several nights in a row, until they successfully sleep in their bed by themselves. And then the aim is to reward them with praise for staying in bed and not for getting out. They also caution to avoid rewarding bedroom breakouts, such as allowing your child to climb into your bed, join the members of the family who are still awake. Instead, praise them in the morning for having stayed in bed all night. And then finally, they advise to make children that are climbers safe. Make sure that the area around them is safe. Take steps to prevent dressers or other furniture from tipping over. And then sometimes for the young toddler, making sure there's a gate at the top of the stairs to prevent them from falling down the stairs if they wander out of their bedroom at night. So that's kind of the summary of what the AAP recommends in healthychildren.org.
So hopefully in this episode, we have helped you to realize that these challenges that you may be experiencing with transitioning your child to the toddler bed are common. You're not alone. It's a very normal part of development if your child is having trouble transitioning. And I hope that we've given you some ideas on tips and tricks and how to get through that period.
Yeah. This is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.